Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk, and this is the weekly question and answer show, and I will be your host, John, and this is your show, guys, so without further ado, we are going to waste no time. We're going to dive right into the questions right now. And our first question is from our channel director, Mr. Smelly Potato, and he wrote, what are your most wanted 4K movies that haven't been released or announced yet, and who would you want to release them? Mine are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trilogy from Shout Factory, Chunky Box, of course, Lightning Jack, Vinegar Syndrome, Chunky Box, Crocodile Dundee trilogy, Arrow Video, that makes a lot of sense, maybe even possibly Umbrella. It's a Mad World, Criterion. If people have never seen a Mad World and you've seen the movie Rat Race, definitely go back and check out It's a Mad World. That movie actually holds up very well, and it's usually on Amazon Prime. Willow from Disney and the Steelbook. That makes a lot of sense as well. And then Down Periscope from Kino Lorber. So every single year, I usually make a list of the movies I want to come to 4K Blu-ray. And this past year, we actually got really spoiled. Some of my favorite movies that were on that list all came to 4K Blu-ray this year or are coming in the near future. Movies like The Terminator, my favorite movie of all time, is coming out this November. Paris, Texas is coming out in November and December, depending where you buy it from. Major League, right after I made that list, Major League got announced for a 4K Blu-ray. So we've been very spoiled, and especially myself. I can't say I haven't gotten a lot of my favorite movies. Most of my favorite movies have actually all come to 4K Blu-ray. Now, there are some outliers like the Lethal Weapon movies. All four of those I've been dying to come to 4K Blu-ray. Now, it's been rumored a lot, actually, over the last year that they will be coming to 4K Blu-ray, courtesy of Warner Brothers. Now, ideally, I wouldn't want them to come from Warner Brothers, even though Warner Brothers, them, and I would say Sony, they do the best job of the major studios giving us 4K Blu-rays, and usually Warner Brothers transfers are pretty spot on. I don't really have too many complaints about it, but ideally, I would like that to come from, like, Arrow Video. Imagine the entire set of all the Lethal Weapon movies in an Arrow Video hard case. I mean, I know that's asking a lot, and I know it'll never happen, but I can dream, can't I? It's like the same thing with Fight Club. I know that that's going to come from Disney because they own the rights to that movie. They'll work with David Fincher on releasing it, and, you know, we're getting 7 on 4K Blu-ray early next year. We just got Zodiac. My review for that will be coming pretty soon, guys. I've heard bad things about that Zodiac 4K Blu-ray. I have it. I'm looking forward to checking it out just because I love the movie Zodiac, and that's only the second David Fincher movie we've gotten on 4K Blu-ray. We got that and The Social Network, which is still, stuck behind the Columbia Classics wall there, which is disappointing as well. I expect 7 to be the best of the David Fincher 4K Blu-rays, and then supposedly he's going to be working on the Fight Club 4K Blu-ray, but that would be from Disney, and that's another one that I've just been dying to come to 4K Blu-ray. And then a lot of the Paul Thomas Anderson movies are movies that I've been wanting to come to 4K Blu-ray. The only movie from him from 4K Blu-ray is Phantom Thread, which is the one he did 2 movies ago. Even Licorice Pizza, the last movie he did, hasn't come to 4K Blu-ray. And movies like Boogie Nights, which is like one of the best movies of the 1990s, still my favorite PTA movie. Somehow that movie hasn't come to 4K Blu-ray, and that's the one that I can see the Criterion Collection doing. They're the ones I would want to do that as well. Boogie Nights feels like a Criterion Collection movie. PTA is one of our great auteurs, especially working today. You know, that wasn't his first film, but that was his second movie, and that was the one that really put him on the map, clearly inspired by Goodfellas, and I just think the Criterion Collection would just give us so many brand new extras for that, would give us a beautiful transfer. Even if they work with Second Sight and give us a beautiful transfer of that, Boogie Nights is one of those movies from the 1990s that deserves to be seen by a bigger crowd. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Also, PTA is The Master, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. That's another one that Amy Adams in that movie too. That's another movie I think would look beautiful on 4K Blu-ray. I know not everybody loves The Master, but that's one I think it gets better each and every single time you watch it. You start to peel back more layers. The first time you watch it, you might not love it, but the second time you're gonna be like, holy shit, this movie's growing on me. And then by the third time, I promise you will like The Master. I just can't guarantee you're gonna love it that first time, but if you can stick with it and come back to it, I really think you'll like it. Phantom Thread, that's a very good 4K Blu-ray, so I know that there are definitely some chances for some great PTA movies on 4K Blu-ray. Just for some reason, I don't know why, we haven't gotten them yet. And then you mentioned another one that I would really love, Mr. Smelly Potato, the TMNT movies on 4K Blu-ray. Now, they actually have a great Blu-ray release where they put it out in that pizza box. I would actually just love for them to do that exact same thing, but with 4K Blu-rays. And I have heard that definitely they're working on the transfer of the original one. I imagine they would give us the entire trilogy in one shot just because, they kind of all go together. When I was a kid, you watched 1, 2, and 3 on VHS, and you loved all three. Yeah, they are different movies. The quality of the costumes increases. I would say the quality of the films decrease as they go along. I think 3 is the worst, and I think the first one is the best. But I know a lot of people love The Secret of the Ooze, and especially, the Go Ninja, Go Ninja, Go. But those movies are some of the great ones from the 1990s, especially if you were a kid growing up in the 90s. You love the TMNT movies. I just burnt the hell out of those VHSs, and it really has been so long since I've watched them. I would love to watch those movies on 4K Blu-ray. So those are pretty high up on my list as well. I am also one of 6 defenders of the internet who actually enjoy Spawn from the 1990s. Just rewatched that last year. I would love that movie to come to 4K Blu-ray, even though it has some of the worst CGI that you could ever imagine. It's a very flawed film, but I can't sit here and lie to you guys and say that I don't enjoy Spawn, and I would really love that movie to come to 4K Blu-ray. I think it's one that, it's a shame because I've even heard Michael Jai White, talk about that movie, and he's trashed it himself, and it's a shame because, you know that there's movies out there, and they're fans of those movies, but then you hear all the actors and people who worked on the film going, no, that movie was dog shit, and I'm like, but I like that dog shit, and it really does suck when that does happen, but still, I would like Spawn to come to 4K Blu-ray, or at least reboot that franchise, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. But that was a great question, Mr. Smelly Potato, and in January, I'll put out a video of my top 10 that I'm looking forward, that I want on 4K Blu-ray. But it was really cool that you asked actually what studios I would like. So TMNT, I didn't give you a studio. That's the one. I think Arrow Video, they can make that big hard box, make it look like a pizza box like the old Blu-ray did. I think that would look awesome. So that was a great question, Mr. Smelly Potato. I really like the twist on it. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. And then the next question is from Emmanuel. He wrote, what's your favorite Netflix original film? So I did a list on this, I think a few months ago, of what my favorites was. But my absolute favorite Netflix original film, despite there being great movies on Netflix, like The Irishman, like these, Marriage Story, movies that I actually own on the Criterion Collection. And I love those movies. But one that's just never gotten a physical release, and this movie hit me emotionally, and that movie is Paddleton. And this movie stars Mark Duplass and Ray Romano. And I believe Mark Duplass co-wrote this movie. And it's funny because I just rewatched the movie Creep not too long ago, starring Mark Duplass. I've seen Mark Duplass on The League. I've always enjoyed his work. And in this movie, teaming up with Ray Romano, it's really just a two-hander, the two of them in this movie. At the very beginning, we see that Mark Duplass gets diagnosed with cancer. Ray Romano's there. They both live in an apartment complex together. They're two single guys. They just kind of hang out with each other. They got a bromance, I believe Mark Duplass is divorced. And they just live in this apartment complex hanging out with each other. And the reason why it's called Paddleton is because they invented this game together called Paddleton. They like to play that game. But the movie is really exploring Mark Duplass getting this cancer and then wanting to end it. And there's a way to do assisted suicide, I believe, in the state of Ohio. So the two of them are going to go on a road trip, get this medicine, and then Mark Duplass is going to kill himself so he doesn't have to go along with all of the pain and suffering that is going to come with this improbable cancer. And the movie is very heartwarming, and yet at the very end, of course, knowing these types of movies, it's going to be very sad. But just seeing what life is for these people. And I also think it's a nice reflection that, marriage isn't for everybody. Having kids isn't for everybody. You could just have a relationship with a really good friend, and that relationship can be so important. And the relationship between Mark Duplass and Ray Romano, two actors who often get overlooked, watching their performances in this movie, and really, they carry this movie because a lot of it really takes place in a couple of settings. It's clearly a low-budget film, so you're really there for the acting and the writing. And I just think it's all so well done, and not too many movies can just hit me like that emotionally. Cancer movies always get me. I really notice that. Movies like My Life, Terms of Endearment, and then this movie, if it's something to do with cancer, I think that's just one of the hardest struggles that you could capture on film. And they always usually end sadly. There's movies out there like 50-50 starring Seth Rogen and Joseph Gordon-Levitt that kind of dive into the more positive twist on things. But, dealing with cancer, it's always going to be really tough. And this movie is definitely really tough, but it's also really enjoyable and really heartwarming. And you can go watch it on Netflix right now. So if you've never seen Paddleton, take this as a recommendation. I think you guys will really enjoy it. And the next question is from Sprazy110, and it's a sports question, which I always like to answer every once in a while. What is your favorite sports memory? So, we're going to tie this into another question also that Dark Room Reviews. Again, check out Dark Room Reviews. He has a great YouTube channel you should check out. I think you guys will really enjoy it. He asked if I liked the Dodgers or the Yankees or who I was going for in the World Series. Now, depending when you guys are watching this video, I don't know how the World Series has ended.
Have won the World Series!
I'm pretty sure at this point it is over, so I'm not too sure how it ends. Right now, currently at the time of this recording, the Yankees are losing the World Series 3-1. Now, I am a New York Mets fan, so, the Dodgers are playing the Yankees. The Dodgers just beat the Mets in the NLCS, which really hurt, and it looks like the Yankees are really struggling with the Los Angeles Dodgers as well. Now, I'm not a Dodgers fan. I don't really mind the Dodgers. They never really bother me. I do like the Yankees, though. Even though I'm a Mets fan, I still do like the Yankees. I'll give you guys a quick little story. When I was growing up, my parents are divorced, so my parents did both get divorced and then remarried. My dad got remarried. I have a couple of half siblings over there. My mom got remarried. Same situation. The thing is I kind of inherited my sports teams, the Jets and the Mets, because my dad decided to pass that down like a gene. And, of course, it's just like the cancer gene, because the Mets and the Jets have done nothing but just hurt me my whole life. The Mets a little less than the Jets. The Jets I think they're cursed. I truly believe that, like, Joe Namath must have signed his soul away or something, because there's just no way that this franchise can be this much of a joke. And, the Mets, for the most part, like, they come around. They went to the World Series in 2015. When I was a kid, they went to the World Series against the Yankees and got murdered in 2000 in the Subway Series. So the Mets, every once in a while they pop up and they're pretty good, and usually they're enjoyable. But I do like the Yankees, and the reason is because my stepdad, when I was a kid, he was a huge Yankees fan, and we went to Yankee games, and I learned to appreciate the Yankees. I watched a lot of documentaries on them. They just have one of those rich histories, and it kind of caught me. Like, I really got wrapped up in the history. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, all these great Yankees, those 1970s Yankee teams with Reggie Jackson and Thurman Munson. A really sad story with Thurman Munson. The captain passed away in a plane crash. And I just love the Yankees franchise. So even though I'm a Met fan first, the only time I won't root for the Yankees is when they're playing the Mets. I really like the Yankees. I really think they're a great franchise. And, if I'm pulling for anyone in this World Series, it is the Yankees. Even though it looks like the Dodgers are going to kill them, then that makes a lot of sense. That team is talented. You can't deny those bats. Mookie Betts, Ohtani. I mean, they even have some pretty decent pitching. John Flaherty's pretty good. So it's tough. It's really Jack Flaherty, rather. That team spent a lot of money to get some great players in there, and it's clearly paying off. Early predictions were that the Dodgers were going to win the World Series. This is why. It can't stop those bats, so it's a little bit tough. But, for me, what is my personal favorite sports memory? Well, I'm also a NASCAR fan, and last year, my favorite NASCAR driver, Ryan Blaney, did win the championship in NASCAR, and that's the only time I've ever experienced any of my franchises ever winning a championship. It was really special to me, because I've never gotten to experience that. Like I was just saying about all my sports teams, they're all losers. Now, I've been a huge NASCAR fan my whole life. I know not a lot of people love NASCAR, and I understand that. I've heard all of the criticisms, and a lot of them are valid. But I've always enjoyed the sport for, what it is. So it's always been the one that, maybe it's because my vision's not the greatest, but still, I've always enjoyed, I get wrapped up in it, and I've always enjoyed the sport. So last year, finally seeing one of my drivers win the championship, given I was a Jeff Gordon fan before that, and he won a championship in 2001, but that was the first year I watched NASCAR. I was 9 years old, and I kind of always felt like it doesn't really count because that was like the first year, but last year finally, like, it all paid off. That's why I'm wearing, I always wear this in the videos, Ryan Blaney. NASCAR is about to end pretty soon, so I get why people don't love NASCAR, but that'll always be like probably that and football are my two favorite sports. I really love baseball as well, and basketball. I love sports, guys. I don't get to talk about them too much here on the channel, but I am a big sports fan. So yeah, my favorite sports memory just came this past year, because none of my other sports teams have even really come that close. The Mets have come almost close, but they really shit the bed when they usually get the World Series that I've watched, so don't get my hopes up with them. But those were some great questions, guys. I really appreciate them as well. And the next question is from Wolf Viking, and last week he was the guy who sent in the question about Trick or Treat, that, Trick or Treat is coming to 4K Blu-ray, but this week he asked if you could only pick one movie that's coming out in November in 2024 to buy, which movie would that be? Well, I don't know how long you've been following the channel, Wolf Viking. I saw that you said that the two you're most looking forward to are The Terminator and Blazing Saddles. Well, for me, it's going to be The Terminator. That is my favorite film of all time. I've been waiting forever for this movie to come to 4K Blu-ray. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical. We'll see how this looks. I've heard some things about this scan. It is James Cameron. I'm not going to get upset if it isn't that great. I'm not going to cry. I promise it's not going to be that bad.
Be strong.
But even if it is bad, I'll be a little bit disappointed. But the previous Blu-ray is still pretty good, and nothing will ever take away from that film. But yeah, my hype for this movie is really high. I cannot wait for this 4K Blu-ray to come. It was supposed to come on November 4th. I believe they pushed it back to November 19th, which is the same day that Blazing Saddles is coming to 4K Blu-ray, same day as North by Northwest. And the other movie I'm really excited for, A Simple Plan, directed by Sam Raimi, which stars Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton. I think this is the most underrated Sam Raimi film. I think it's going to translate so good to 4K Blu-ray. It's coming out at the perfect time, like as the air's starting to get colder, the snow's on the ground in this movie. Also, I am importing Austin Powers on 4K Blu-ray. That's coming out on November 11th. I've been waiting for that movie a really long time to come to 4K Blu-ray as well. Would have liked the whole trilogy, and I know a lot of people don't love this box art. I personally really enjoy it. I kind of like what they did with the colors. I can see why people wouldn't like it, but if you've watched the channel for any amount of time too, you can clearly see that I love that like bright colors, 80s aesthetic, and I think this captures that, even though it's a movie that came out in 1997. So I really do like the colorfuls, like slipcover that this one's gonna have. So that's what I'm also really looking forward to. I actually haven't pre-ordered Blazing Saddles yet, but I'm definitely gonna be getting that on 4K Blu-ray. Don't love the box art, but still, I don't really care. But November is another stacked month. Born on the 4th of July, I just got in. Really excited to check out that one on 4K Blu-ray. You guys will see a review for that pretty soon. It's just coming down to the end of the year. We're getting so many great movies coming to 4K Blu-ray. November is another just big month, and then in December, it's going to be huge as well with movies that, another set of movies I've been waiting to come to 4K Blu-ray are Demolition Man and No Country for Old Men. I believe those are coming out on the very same day. So early December is also looking really, really good for 4K Blu-rays. And I think we got really spoiled this year. We'll talk about a year-end wrap-up as, we get to the end of December, early January. But I think this was a fantastic year in the world of physical media, and November is clearly no different. And I just cannot wait for the Terminator to come to 4K Blu-ray on November 19th, it looks like. I pre-ordered the Steelbook. Even though I think I like the slipcover more, I'm still going to get that Steelbook. Hopefully it looks pretty good in person. It's grown on me, I'm not going to lie. It's definitely grown on me a little bit. And you know what? Let me know, what are you guys looking forward to as far as November 4K Blu-ray releases? Leave those comments in the comment section below. I'm just curious, what are you guys really excited for with November? There's a lot coming out. And that was a great question, Wolf Viking. I appreciate that, buddy. All right, the next question is from Kevin Kruger, and it's taking me a little bit to do this question because there were some vampire movies I wanted to watch. But before we get into that, I'll just read the question. What are your top 10 vampire movies? So I actually wanted to go back and check out some vampire movies before I did this list, and one of those movies I wanted to check out was Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark from 1987, which you can't buy physically at all right now, and you can't stream it, so it's really impossible to watch, which disappoints me because I remember liking that movie a lot, and it might have made this list, but without a rewatch, I don't feel good about putting it on my list yet. So we'll start from the bottom and work our way up. And this one I have like a tie because a lot of people might not count this one. But if you do, I would say Jennifer's Body from 2009 that I just rewatched. Technically not a vampire movie, but it follows a lot of the vampire movie tropes. And, she's got to eat some skin. So it's almost the same thing. And if she doesn't, she really starts to fade away. But if you don't count that, I'll also throw in John Carpenter's Vampires, which is a pretty good movie from the 1990s, starring James Wood. It's got a great score, as always. This one's one of the more forgotten John Carpenter movies, mainly because it came out in the late 1990s, and I believe he only did 2 or 3 more movies after this. I want to say 2, actually, and then that was pretty much. So this is kind of like at the tail end of John Carpenter's directing career. Still pretty good movies. And at number 9, I had to put a classic, even though I think these other movies are more enjoyable, but Nosferatu, the original Nosferatu, I believe from 1922. Don't quote me on that, I'm probably wrong. But, this movie originated because they tried to get the rights to Dracula, 1887's Dracula, which would eventually become 1931's Dracula on film. These German filmmakers, they couldn't get the rights to it, so they made their own. They basically just changed the name, so instead of Count Dracula, it's Count Olaf. But it became even more popular than anyone could have ever expected, and now it is considered like, one of the defining vampire movies, one of the greatest vampire movies of all time, one of the greatest silent films of all time. And if you go back and watch it, you could just see like the bones of what would become the horror genre while watching this movie. And, it's gotten a remake in the past, and it will have a remake by Robert Eggers coming out at the end of 2024. I believe on Christmas Day, one of my most anticipated movies of the rest of the year. I cannot wait to see it. What a better way to spend Christmas than watching Nosferatu. But the original one, if you haven't seen it, you got to see it at least once. And number 8, 30 Days of Night. You know, you go to an Alaskan town. I always wanted to live in Alaska for this very region because, you know, it'll stay dark out for like 30 days, or I don't even know what. I've heard so many different things, but hey, I hate the sun. Look at my skin. The sun hates me, and I don't like the sun, and for good reason. It'll try and burn me to death, so maybe I am part vampire. But anyway, this one turns into a vampire movie, a really, really good one. It's just, you know, putting the vampires out in the snow. That's something that's a little bit different. I know a lot of people love this movie as well. Number 7, I put From Dusk Till Dawn. Now, I don't exactly love the twist of this movie turning into a vampire movie, but overall, as a film, directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring Quentin Tarantino in a role, it was just pretty funny as well. And then, of course, George Clooney, Harvey Keitel, I believe Juliette Lewis is in this. It's a very good movie. Salma Hayek, and then, you know, when they get to the titty twister, it all just goes off the rails, which it bothered me the first time I watched this movie. I'm not gonna lie, because I really enjoyed the movie up to that point, and I didn't love the twist. But now, looking back on it, rewatching the movie, I can appreciate it, knowing that it's coming, and I enjoy this movie more than I ever have. And number 6 is Abigail. Came out in 2024. And this is one people didn't realize was a vampire movie, unless you watch the trailers, because they gave that shit away right away in every single one of them. But if you went into this movie blind, like I did, you didn't realize that it's going to turn into a vampire movie, and it actually turns into a great vampire movie at that. I always like it when they kind of play with your expectations. We think it's going to be about one character, but really it's about this other character, and she has powers. She is a vampire, and basically this is just one big feeding for her, done by the Radio Silence guys who did the last 2 Scream movies and Ready or Not, and the ending to this movie reminded me a lot of Ready or Not, and I really enjoyed it. I love the way these guys shoot movies. I love how they light their movies. You can always tell it's their movies. At number 5, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Gary Oldman, doing a great job, Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves trying his best in this movie, but what you're really there for is the beautiful production design, beautiful costume designs. What Gary Oldman is wearing in the beginning of this movie and the way that scene is lit always sticks out in my head. This has actually gotten 2 4K Blu-ray releases. It's got an Adobe Vision re-release, but it also came out a few years ago with just HDR10, which is the version that I have. Either way, or check out Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think it's one of the forgotten Francis Ford Coppola classics. Number 4, What We Do in the Shadows, directed and also co-starring Taika Waititi. Not the show. A lot of people might not realize that the show is a spin-off of a movie, and the movie is an all-time classic. I think the show might have surpassed it, which is crazy to think because that never really happens. You can argue that Fargo had the same thing happen where the show surpassed the movie. I love the Fargo movie, but I also really love the first 2 seasons of it. The last couple, but the first 2 seasons of Fargo, especially the first one with Colin Hanks and Billy Bob Thornton, some of the best TV that you will ever see. Remember that elevator scene. But still, What We Do in the Shadows, watch the movie on its own. It's absolutely hysterical. Number 3, Blade. Yes, he is a vampire. He is the Daywalker. He is going to be the one to take down all of these vampires. The original Blade is an all-time classic. The 4K Blu-ray from Warner Brothers is amazing. Definitely check that one out. One of the most underrated superhero films. One of the most underrated superheroes of all time. You bet I jumped out of my seat when Wesley Snipes popped up in Deadpool and Wolverine. Number 2, the one that really started it all for like the no, I guess it isn't really the one that started it all, but Dracula from 1931 popularized the vampire genre in 1931, starring Bela Lugosi. This also has a Spanish version of the movie where it's like they shot, I believe, this one in the day and they shot the Spanish version at night, and on the 4K Blu-ray for the Universal Monsters, you could actually watch both versions of it. And I know people like the Spanish version actually more than the English version, but the way this movie is lit, the story that they're telling, it's amazing that this movie holds up this well. It really has no business holding up this well almost 100 years later. A lot of those Universal Monsters movies do. They really were that well made. Their subject matter, it's very surprising for the time. You wouldn't think it'd be this good. But if you're one of those people that doesn't go back to classic films, please try the Universal Monsters. And then at number 1, 1987's The Lost Boys, directed by Joel Schumacher, which is crazy because this guy pretty much has gotten shit on since 1997 when Batman and Robin came out. And the guy's a great director. He really is. You can't blame him for what happened with the Batman franchise. That was all Warner Brothers. They wanted to sell toys, and sell toys they did. And this guy bought them. So I can't sit here and say like I didn't buy those toys, but still, those movies. I like Batman Forever. It's also like a alternate Halloween film. And Batman and Robin, it's just a glorified cartoon. It's ridiculous. I don't want to watch that movie again. I saw it in theaters. But Joel Schumacher before that, he made this movie. He also made Flatliners, Falling Down. So he's made so many great movies. And this movie is the greatest vampire movie ever. Of course, other people might disagree with me and be like, hey, you're just kind of an 80s fanboy, which is kind of true. I do love the 1980s. It's my favorite decade. So I always give it like a little bit of bonus points if you can kind of capture that 80s tone. And boy, this movie does. Look at the great list of actors that pop up in it. Jason Patric, Kiefer Sutherland. It is just a fantastic film. It has to be my number one. And I know a lot of people will appreciate this movie as much as I do. David, a.k.a. Shamrock Balls, I know that this is his daughter's favorite film. So that's pretty cool. A younger person actually learning to love The Lost Boys. And the next questions are from Retro Memory. 2 questions for you. Which decade of film was the most influential for you as a fan? Mine is the 80s. If you could reboot any film or series, which would it be and why? Mine would be John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars. I think it has a lot of untapped lore. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, Retro Memory. And I agree with you, actually. The 1980s is definitely the biggest influence on the film fan that I am. And it's funny because I wasn't born until 1992, so I never spent a second in the 1980s. But the big thing and the biggest influence on my film love is my mother. My mother had me at a pretty young age. And she'll tell you to this very day that she wasn't watching kids' movies with me and my brother. She's like, that's it, I'm not doing it. So we watched a lot of movies that she loved while I was growing up. Movies like E.T. and Poltergeist, a lot of films from the 1980s. And they just played a huge influence on me because those were the movies I was watching at a very, very young age. Maybe other kids were watching like cartoons. And my dad, when I'd go to like I said earlier, when my parents were divorced, I'd go to my dad's house and he was more of the conventional parent. So if we're going to see movies, we're going to see movies like The Lion King, and he's going to take us to see animated films because he thinks that's what kids like, which is, more conventional. That's what more the regular parent would do. Well, my mother's like, I don't give a shit. We're watching this movie, and she never ever stopped me from watching rated R films. So I was seeing any kind of movies I wanted before the age of 10, and most of them were from the 1980s. And I just always loved the 1980s pacing, the 1980s clothes, the 1980s set design. I just love all of that, and that was the biggest influence on me. Even though I grew up in the 1990s and I love 1990s films and I love 1970s films, if there was ever a decade in film that just is special to me, it's always going to be the 1980s. One thing about today is we have a lot of movies that take place in the 1980s, kind of like how in the 1980s we had a lot of movies that took place in the 1950s. But if you just go back and watch a film from the 1980s, it's almost impossible to recapture that tone, and it does kind of feel like an overcorrection of the 1970s, which were, a correction for coming out of the code of the 1960s and all those decades before it. But the 1970s, they felt more raw, gritty, great character studies, whereas the 1980s, they do become bigger studio films. The studios play a bigger part in putting these movies out, and they concentrate on making money. It's a lot of consumerism in there, and you could argue, like I know Quentin Tarantino will, is that movies took a step back in the 1980s. And Quentin Tarantino is my favorite director of all time. I will respectfully disagree with that assessment, but again, I know that nostalgia plays a huge part on me, and I'm sure nostalgia plays a huge part in Quentin Tarantino, and those are the movies he grew up watching with his family. Well, I grew up watching all these 1980s films, and those just had a huge influence on me. Now, what about a franchise that I would love to reboot, or a film that I would love to reboot? Well, actually, I would love to see Spawn rebooted, and it's been rumored forever that it would actually, Todd McFarlane obviously has worked on other stuff in the Spawn universe. It's his baby. But this is a film that I think has so much potential. The comic book is beloved. The animated series is beloved. I don't know why they've never gone back to it. We're kind of coming out of the comic book and superhero films and their lore and their stranglehold on the box office. Movies like Venom, The Last Dance didn't do that great at the box office. Wolverine and Deadpool is really the outlier of the last couple of years. And I feel like Spawn would have fit perfectly into that, but it might be too little too late, unfortunately, when it comes to the Spawn film. I would also like to reboot my favorite franchise of all time, the Terminator franchise. I feel like it's long overdue. I don't want another sequel. I just want them to restart the franchise. And, with everything we know about artificial intelligence in 2024, 40 years later, there's so many different ways you can go, and not trying to tie yourself down to those legacy characters. Like Dark Fate had great ideas, but they made sure to shoot John Connor in the fucking face right in the beginning, just so I go into the whole rest of the movies extremely skeptical and a little bit upset, even though they're bringing back Linda Hamilton. Just leave the franchise be. We all know that Terminator 1 and 2 are by far the best. I'm a fan of the whole franchise just because I loved the Terminator and everything about it. So I forgive a lot of those movies, even if they're not great, except Genesis. I'll never forgive Genesis. And I think there's just so many different ways with how AI is being used. Now you can go so many different ways with the franchise. Take things from those movies that, were good talking points. Maybe have like our main character, the person who has to take down Skynet, because keep the name Skynet. I think it works great. Maybe have him be the guy who created the AI, kind of like how they were showing you in Terminator 3, where it was Catherine Brewster's father. Like, have him create the AI, and then like a version of him has to come back and kill the Terminator only like maybe 10 to 15 years in the future, so that we can have that dynamic of an older version of the character playing along with a younger version of the character. Because we have that de-aging technology out there, there's a bunch of different ways you can go. And I would love to see them do it. Maybe set aside a trilogy, plan it out. Don't go the Star Wars route where you give a different director a different film and then they're just trying to undo what the other one did. No, plan out an entire trilogy. Maybe have someone come in and direct it, and who's going to do all three, write all three. And you can end up really telling a fantastic story, because the Terminator franchise, there's a reason why they always try to reboot it, because the first two movies are some of the greatest in film history. They had a lot to say in the sci-fi, action, horror genre, and they are just such special films, and they are really special to me. So that was a great question, Retro Memory. I really appreciate two great questions, actually. Thank you so much, buddy. And the next question from Sprazy110 is, do you have any of those third-party plastic protectors that go over your movies? No, I don't, actually, and those things would drive me nuts, if I'm being honest with you, because they would get, like, scratchy, or they would get scratches on it, or you get some dirt underneath. It's actually the reason why I don't have, like, a screen protector on my phone, is because, like, I get, like, that's the little things that will give me OCD. Like, one little speck of dirt that, like, gets under that case, it's gonna drive me nuts. So there's just no way I would end up probably buying those cases. I understand why people do and buy the steelbook protectors, but for me, for the most part, they're sitting on my shelf. The only thing that's gonna really happen to them is like they get dust on it. No one's gonna be pulling them down, and where they're gonna get damaged. The only damage on any of them is if they came damaged at all. But that's really it. Nothing has ever really happened to my collection. Knock on wood, because I've heard some horror stories. I know people have had floods in their houses and basements and lost like their whole collections, and oh my God, I feel such sympathy for those people, and I'm always petrified that's going to happen to me, and let's hope that doesn't happen to any of us. But that was a great question as well, Sprazy. Thanks, buddy. And then the last question of the week is from our buddy 021OM6, and he wrote, do you think Hollywood should work with the top social media influencers as a strategy to get more Gen Zers to watch movies? Just like how boxing has brought in a lot of Gen Z viewers when influencers fight. What strategies would you use to get more Gen Zers to watch more long-form media to keep our beloved art form alive and well? And this is a great question, 0201M6. In general, right now, we've talked about it in the past, how we just don't develop new cinephiles anymore. That's a big reason why new generations aren't going to the movies as much. I feel like my generation, like I said earlier, I was born in 1992. So when I was growing up, there were video games, but we didn't have online video games yet. That wouldn't really happen until like 2006, in my late teens. So we really just grew up like around the time when like cable was there. We had Super Nintendo, PlayStation, N64, all that good stuff. But we really still had movies, and a lot of people were still big movie fans that loved going to the movies. But now people are born, people might not realize this, older people especially, have been born over the last 20 years where the internet has existed their entire lives. So they've always had these short form entertainment. Like, there are people out there who have had an iPhone in their hand their entire lives. A lot of us who are cinephiles never really got to experience that. Our phones might even give us anxiety. I've told you guys how I don't like to use social media because I just feel like it's a train wreck. But there are people who absolutely love that, who absolutely love TikTok. But how do we bring in new film fans? Could we have like Gen Z like influencers going to the movies? Well, they are trying that. That's the big thing, is like if you ever see these like junkets, they invite influencers to them to ask questions, and usually a lot of time they're pretty rude with their journalism, mainly because journalism is very different. I see it all the time. Like Serial at Midnight is always talking about how modern day film critics, it's really about like almost like shock value at this point, or headline grabbing. So if you only have like 30 seconds to review a film, and that's what most people will, like, they're scrolling through TikTok, they'll watch a quick 30-second review. They're not going to give you a lot of background on the director, the actors in there. They're just going to give you a quick review if the movie's good or not. And that's really it. And then for a lot of people, like, it has to be a big spectacle for them to go to the movies. So movies like last year, for example, Oppenheimer and Barbie. The reason why those movies both did so well is you kind of had that big double booking of them coming out on the same day, July 21st, 2023. You can go see Oppenheimer, and then you can cleanse your palate with Barbie. And that's really what gets the younger viewers in there. It has to feel like a big event where they can take videos, because cell phones aren't going away. We can all be curmudgeons about this, and I do feel like in a certain way, some film critics and some film fans, and even us a little bit in the physical media community, we will kind of gatekeep a little bit, where we don't really welcome in new fans of what we love. And that's a problem. We kind of like will shun them because they don't know like classic film. Well, unless we show them classic film, how are they going to learn about it? You could argue that a lot of us have to do the work ourselves, so they should, but it's a different generation. They've grown up with different things, and if we want them to become film fans and maybe not rely so much on video games, which is probably the most popular medium right now, even more pop. Look at what's happened with books. Like, books used to be one of the most popular things in the world as well, and now there aren't as many readers because of technology. So how do we get more film fans? We have to make sure that they go to the movies and they are enjoying these movies. The movies have to be enjoyable. I've seen that retro movies coming back in the theaters are doing pretty well, so there are an audience out there who want to see classic films. So maybe putting more classic films into theaters, inviting these Generation Z influencers out there who people know, show them the movies and let them give their views on it and make them feel welcome. That's the big thing. You have to make them feel welcome to the film universe. Like, hey, you know what? Have you ever seen Casablanca? It's one of those old movies that holds up so well. Let me show it to you. It's playing at this theater. And then you could tell your subscribers, your fans, about how good this movie is, and maybe they'll pick up the movie and check it out for themselves, because they're probably going to hear that the movie came out in the 1940s, it's in black and white, and they're just going to write it off as an old film. And that's a shame. That's just really what a lot of people do. Now, it's not everybody. There are some young film fans who follow this channel, so they are still out there. I think it really has to be like the parents, showing their kids the movies as well. But really, the big influencers out there, those big Gen Z influencers, they're going to have to promote the movies, because no one's going to really be coming to a channel like this for like the longer form reviews. And I get that, but there are people like me and people like you who enjoy like a good 10 to 15 minute review where they break down everything. And, like just like how the reviews were when I was growing up, or I used to like reading reviews. And I've said it a million times, film criticism is one of my favorite things ever. And that's why I want to be a film critic myself. But film criticism is another dying form of art, unfortunately, because people don't really like criticism and they get offended by it almost. I saw on X this past week, actually, somebody was criticizing HD Movie Source's information about the Zodiac 4K Blu-ray and saying how they were being negative and we don't need this kind of information. It's like, well, you kind of do, because people are going to ask questions as to why this 4K Blu-ray doesn't look good, and HD Movie Source breaks it down perfectly as to why. And just because you don't want to hear that's not an excuse. Like, people want that kind of information, but I just feel like a lot of people today, they want a quick yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down, which is why, Siskel and Ebert did that, is because a lot of people even back then just wanted the quick, hey, it's good, hey, it's bad, don't want any more information. Me, I always wanted as much information as possible. Even if I disagreed with the critic's opinion, I wanted to know more about it. And even if I disagreed, I still wanted to know why they didn't like it. That's the job of a good critic, to explain to you why they didn't like the movie or why they don't like a 4K transfer. As long as they do that well, you might disagree with them, but hey, it's their opinion at the end of the day. And, we need these Gen Z influencers to kind of do the same thing, but they have to do it in a shorter form. I can't get behind the short form stuff, But to get more cinephiles out there and more people going to the movies or more people buying physical media, I'll get 100% behind it. If they wanted to talk to me, I would be more than willing to have them on my channel as well. I just personally don't know too much about them because, again, I'm not somebody who's on social media that much or on TikTok. I really just go on YouTube and watch all my buddies' videos and all the YouTube channels that I want to watch, but that's really it. And so you can say like, hey, you know, I'm not doing the work myself to help out the younger viewers, but it's also really hard to run a YouTube channel. I do my best, but if there are any Gen Z influencers out there or younger viewers of this channel who can give me some help as to how to get younger viewers to become cinephiles, I would really appreciate that. Leave all that information in the comment section below as well. And that was a great topic, 0210M6. I really appreciate that. I think that's something that's important for us to talk about. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it here for me on another episode of the Let's Talk Q&A show. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video if you could. We also have channel membership. So if you want to become a friend of the channel, a producer for the channel, like Jed Eckert and John Doe Juggler, or a channel director like Mr. Smelly Potato and Frank from Frank's Media and Reviews, you can look for all that information in the description below. But if you guys got no money to throw away, don't worry about it at all. We just hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, get out in those streets, tell your friends about us, and then we'll be seeing you around.